The crystal chandelier above the Castellano family dining table cast fractured light across mahogany that had witnessed 3 generations of power. Don Marco Castellano didn't believe in sentiment, only in leverage. Tonight, like most nights in the autumn of 2023, only 2 plates held food, his own and his consigliere's. Elena Vega moved soundlessly between the industrial kitchen and the formal dining room, her worn sneakers making no impression on marble floors that cost more than she'd earn in 5 years. She'd perfected the art of invisibility over 14 months of working in this fortress, disguised as a mansion. In a house where men spoke in code and consequence, being forgotten was survival. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured water into crystal glasses. Not from fear of the men at the table, though. They were dangerous enough to make hardened criminals nervous. No, her hands shook because of the text message burning in her pocket. The one from Children's Memorial Hospital that had arrived an hour ago while she was preparing antipasto. Luca's fever is 104. We need to admit him tonight. Insurance denied the claim. You need to pay up front or we cannot proceed with treatment. $14,000. $14,000 might as well have been $14 million. Elena made $900 a week cleaning the Castellano mansion, cooking meals that cost more than her monthly rent, serving men who barely registered her existence. After rent, after utilities, after Luca's existing medical bills, she had maybe $300 in her checking account. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Her 6-year-old son was burning up with an inexplained infection. The doctors couldn't identify without running tests. The insurance company had deemed not medically necessary, as if her child's life was a luxury expense. As if the fever that had climbed steadily over 3 days was somehow optional to treat. More wine, Victor Rossi, the consigliere, said without looking at her. His attention remained fixed on the documents spread across the table. Shipping manifests, probably, or financial reports from the legitimate businesses that fronted the Castellano empire. Elena reached for the bottle, her sleeve riding up slightly to reveal a bruise on her inner wrist. Not from violence this time, but from the IV port they'd tried to place in Luca 2 days ago, when his veins had been too small, too dehydrated from the fever. The nurse had apologized profusely while Elena held her screaming child and tried not to imagine worst-case scenarios. Don Castellano's eyes tracked the movement. He was 52, with silver threading through black hair, that he wore slicked back in a style that belonged to an earlier era. His suit was charcoal gray, perfectly tailored, and he wore it with the ease of someone who'd never questioned his right to occupy space. A thin scar ran from his left eyebrow into his hairline, white against olive skin, a reminder that even power came with prices. "You're distracted tonight, Elena," he observed, his voice carrying the faint accent of his Sicilian childhood. Not a question, not quite an accusation, just a statement of fact that demanded response. "My apologies, Don Castellano," she said quietly, finishing the pour without spilling despite the shaking in her hands. "It won't happen again." His dark eyes held hers for a moment that stretched too long. Marco Castellano missed nothing, a trait that had kept him alive and in power for 23 years in a business where most men lasted less than 10. He saw the exhaustion carved into her features, the careful way she moved, the phone she kept checking, during every spare moment. But he said nothing, just returned his attention to the documents, while Elena retreated to the kitchen on legs that threatened to buckle. Maria, the head housekeeper who'd worked for the Castellano family since Marco's father ran things, looked up from where she was plating dessert. She was 67, with hands weathered from decades of work, and eyes that had witnessed things she'd never speak about. "You look like death," Maria said bluntly, her own accent thick despite 40 years in America. "What's wrong?" Elena's composure, held together by sheer will for the past 3 hours, cracked. "It's Luca. He's sick, really sick, and the hospital won't treat him without payment up front. I don't have $14,000, Maria. I don't even have 1,000. Maria's expression softened. She'd raised 3 children on a housekeeper's salary, knew exactly what Elena was facing. "Have you asked for an advance on your pay?" "Mr. Rossi handles payroll. You know what he's like." Elena pressed her palms against the stainless steel counter, trying to steady herself. Victor Rossi was efficient, professional, and utterly without sympathy for personal problems. He'd made that clear when Elena had asked for time off after Luca's initial diagnosis 2 months ago. You have sick days. Use them. Beyond that, I need reliable staff, not people with complications. As if her child's illness was a complication rather than a catastrophe. The Don, Maria said carefully, lowering her voice despite the kitchen being empty except for them. He's not his father. Old Carlo would have had you fired for even appearing troubled during service. But Marco, he's different. Harder in some ways, but he has lines, rules. One of them is about children. Elena looked up sharply. What do you mean? His sister, Julia, died when she was 8. Pneumonia that went untreated because their father was too busy with territory wars to notice she was sick. Marco was 12. He blamed himself for not speaking up, for not demanding their father pay attention. Maria began arranging cannoli on a serving platter, with practiced efficiency. He never talks about it, but everyone who's worked here long enough knows. Children, specifically sick children, that's his weak point. I can't ask him, Elena said, but even as she spoke, her mind was calculating. $14,000 was nothing to Marco Castellano. The wine they served at dinner cost more than that. The suit he wore cost 3 times that amount. But asking meant revealing vulnerability, meant stepping out of invisibility, meant becoming visible in a way that could end very badly. Then don't ask, Maria said. Just tell him. State the facts. Let him make the decision. Before Elena could respond, the bell for service rang. Dessert needed to be delivered. She arranged the cannoli on fine china, added the espresso service, and carried everything back to the dining room with hands that had finally stopped shaking. Fear had crystallized into something else. Not quite courage, but desperate necessity that looked similar from the outside. The meal continued for another 20 minutes. Business discussed in careful language that revealed nothing specific. Elena served, cleared, refreshed drinks, existed in the background like expensive furniture. But when Don Castellano finally stood, signaling the evening's end, she made a decision that would change everything. Don Castellano, she said, her voice cutting through the sound of chairs scraping against marble. Both men turned to look at her, surprise evident on their faces. Staff didn't speak unless spoken to, didn't interrupt, didn't exist beyond their function. Marco's expression shifted to something unreadable. Yes? The words came out in a rush before she could lose her nerve. Please don't fire me. My son needs medicine. He's 6 years old and he's in the hospital with an infection the doctors can't treat without tests. The insurance denied the claim. I need $14,000 by tonight, or they won't admit him. I'm begging you, please. I'll work double shifts. I'll do anything. But I need help, and I have nowhere else to turn. Silence crashed through the room like a physical force. Victor Rossi's face had gone red, his hand moving slightly toward his jacket in a gesture that suggested violence as response to this breach of protocol. But Marco raised one hand, stopping him. How old did you say your son is? Marco asked, his voice dangerously quiet. 6. His name is Luca. He's been sick for 3 days and the fever won't break, and they need to run tests to figure out what's causing it, but the insurance company said, I know what insurance companies say. Marco cut her off, but not unkindly. He moved closer, studying her face with an intensity that made Elena want to step back. But she held her ground, meeting his eyes even though everything in her training as staff screamed not to. You've worked here 14 months, he said. You arrive early, leave late. You've never asked for anything, never caused problems, never given me reason to question your discretion or loyalty. Yes, sir. And now you're begging me for money. Do you understand how this looks? How this could be perceived as manipulation or exploitation of my goodwill? Elena's heart sank. She'd miscalculated, misread the situation, let desperation override common sense. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. Victor, Marco said, turning to his consigliere. Get Dr. Russo on the phone. Tell him I need him at Children's Memorial immediately. Tell him to bring whatever he needs to evaluate a 6-year-old with an unidentified infection. Elena's breath caught. Doctor. Anthony Russo was the Castellano family physician, a man whose credentials were impeccable and whose discretion was absolute. He treated everyone from street-level associates to the Don himself, asked no questions, and maintained standards of care that made him valuable enough to command loyalty across family lines. Marco, Victor said carefully, this sets a precedent. Staff asking for money, for personal intervention. Did I ask for your opinion? Marco's voice dropped 20 degrees. Make the call, now. Victor pulled out his phone and stepped away, his expression suggesting he thought this was a mistake but knew better than to argue further. Marco returned his attention to Elena. What hospital? Children's Memorial. 4th floor, pediatric unit, room 412. I'm going with you. He was already moving toward the entrance hall where his driver would be waiting. Victor, handle the payment directly. 14,000 to clear the immediate issue, and set up an account for ongoing treatment. Whatever the child needs, whatever tests, whatever medications. I want complete medical records sent to Dr. Russo for review. Elena stood frozen, unable to process what was happening. This wasn't how the world worked. Rich men, he didn't help desperate mothers. Mafia bosses didn't care about sick children they'd never met. There had to be a catch, a price, something he'd demand in return that would make this miracle transform into a different kind of nightmare. Come, Marco said from the doorway, his tone making it clear this was not a request. Your son is waiting. She followed because she had no other choice, because Luca needed help and pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. Maria caught her eye as she passed through the kitchen, giving her a small nod that might have been encouragement or warning. The car was a black Mercedes, bulletproof and expensive, the kind of vehicle that screamed power to anyone who understood such things. The driver, a man named Carlo, who Elena had seen but never spoken to, opened the back door without comment. She slid in, acutely aware that she was still wearing her work clothes, that she smelled like kitchen grease and cleaning products, that she was getting into a car that probably cost more than her apartment building. Marco settled beside her, with the ease of someone accustomed to luxury. He made a quick phone call, his Italian too rapid for Elena to follow, then turned his attention to her. Tell me about your son. It wasn't a question, but Elena answered anyway, desperate to fill the silence with something other than her own racing thoughts. Luca. He's 6. 1st grade. He loves dinosaurs and wants to be a paleontologist when he grows up. He's smart. So smart. Reads at a 3rd grade level already. Her voice caught. 3 days ago he came home from school with a fever. I thought it was just a cold. Gave him children's Tylenol. Made him rest. But it got worse. Yesterday his fever hit 103. Today it's 104 and he's not responding to antibiotics. His father? Gone. Left before Luca was born. I haven't heard from him in 6 years. Elena stared at her hands, at the cheap ring she wore on her right hand that had been her mother's. It's just us. Has been from the beginning. Marco nodded slowly, his expression unreadable in the dim interior. My sister died when she was 8. Pneumonia. My father was too busy with business to notice she was sick until it was too late. By the time he finally called a doctor, her lungs were too damaged. She died 3 days later. Elena looked at him, seeing past the expensive suit and the carefully maintained power to something raw underneath. Guilt, maybe, or grief that had never fully healed. I was 12, Marco continued, his voice distant. Old enough to have known better, to have insisted we get help sooner, but I was afraid of my father, afraid of seeming weak or needy. So I said nothing, and Julia paid the price. His dark eyes met hers. I made a promise at her funeral. Any child, anywhere, if I have the power to help them, I will. No hesitation, no calculation of cost or benefit. Just action. I don't know how to thank you, Elena managed. Don't thank me yet. I don't know what we're dealing with. He pulled out his phone again, typed something rapidly. Dr. Russo will meet us there. He trained at Johns Hopkins. Specializes in pediatric infectious diseases. If your son has something the hospital missed, he'll find it. The drive took 17 minutes through Chicago's night traffic. Elena spent every second of it fighting the urge to call the hospital, to demand updates, to do something productive, instead of sitting in forced stillness beside a man whose world operated by rules she didn't understand. When they finally pulled up to the hospital's emergency entrance, Marco was out of the car before it fully stopped. Elena scrambled to follow, nearly tripping over her own feet in her haste. Inside, the fluorescent lights were harsh after the Mercedes' dim interior. Elena headed straight for the elevators, muscle memory guiding her through corridors she'd walked too many times over the past 3 days. Marco kept pace beside her, his presence, somehow making nurses and orderlies step aside without him saying a word. 4th floor, pediatric unit, room 412. Elena pushed through the door and found Luca exactly as she'd left him 3 hours ago. Small and pale against white hospital sheets, an IV running into his left arm, monitors beeping steadily. But his eyes were open, and when he saw her, he tried to smile. "Mama," he whispered, his voice hoarse from fever and crying. She was at his bedside instantly, taking his small hand in hers, careful of the IV line. "I'm here, baby. I'm here, and everything's going to be okay." "I don't feel good." Tears leaked from the corners of his eyes. "It hurts everywhere." "I know, sweetheart. I know. But we're going to fix it. There's a doctor coming, a very good doctor, and he's going to figure out what's making you sick." Luca's gaze shifted past her to where Marco stood in the doorway. His child's instinct for reading people kicked in, and fear flickered across his face. "Who's that?" Elena turned, suddenly aware of how this must look. A man in an expensive suit, with a face that suggested violence as easily as protection, standing in her son's hospital room. "This is Mr. Castellano. He's my employer, and he's helping us. Like a superhero?" Luca asked, his fever-bright eyes studying Marco with the brutal honesty only children possessed. Marco's expression softened slightly. He moved into the room, careful to keep his movements non-threatening, and crouched down beside the bed to be at Luca's eye level. "Not a superhero. Just someone who wants to help. Your mama tells me you like dinosaurs?" Luca nodded weakly. "My favorite is the Spinosaurus. Most people think T-Rex is the best, but Spinosaurus was actually bigger and it could swim. Smart choice. I always liked velociraptors myself. Small but fierce." "They were smart hunters," Luca agreed, his words slurring slightly as exhaustion pulled at him. "Worked in packs. Used strategy." "Exactly right," Marco stood, his attention shifting to the monitors beside the bed. "Dr. Russo will be here soon. He's very good at figuring out medical mysteries. Try to rest." But Luca was already drifting, the fever pulling him under into fitful sleep. Elena smoothed his dark hair back from his forehead, feeling the heat radiating from his skin. "His fever's climbing," she said quietly. "It was 104 an hour ago. It feels higher now." Marco moved to the door, spoke quietly to someone in the hallway. Within minutes, a nurse appeared with ice packs and additional fever medication. "Dr. Patel ordered this 20 minutes ago," she explained, efficiently placing ice packs under Luca's arms and behind his neck. "But we've been short-staffed tonight. I apologize for the delay." "Unacceptable," Marco said, his voice carrying enough weight that the nurse actually flinched. "This child should have received medication the moment his temperature changed. I want to speak with your supervisor." "Sir, I'm sorry, but hospital policy—" "I don't care about hospital policy. I care about this child receiving proper care immediately. Get your supervisor. Now." The nurse fled. Elena should have felt embarrassed by the scene, by the attention they were drawing. Instead, she felt grateful. For the first time in 3 days, someone was treating Luca's illness with the urgency it deserved, demanding action instead of paperwork and protocol. Dr. Russo arrived 12 minutes later. He was in his early 50s, graying at the temples, with the kind of face that inspired confidence through competence, rather than warmth. He nodded to Marco, then turned his full attention to Elena. "I'm Dr. Anthony Russo. Tell me everything from the beginning. Every symptom, every medication, every change you've noticed." Elena walked him through the timeline while he examined Luca with careful thoroughness. The fever's progression, the antibiotics that hadn't worked, the blood tests that had come back inconclusive. "Doctor?" Russo listened without interrupting, his examination revealing the kind of expertise that came from decades of practice. "Has he been exposed to any animals recently, doctor?" Russo asked. "Particularly rodents or birds?" Elena thought back. "There's a park near our apartment. He plays there after school. There are lots of pigeons, some squirrels. Any bites or scratches?" "Not that I noticed, but he's 6. He doesn't always tell me when he gets hurt playing." Dr. Russo nodded, making notes on his phone. "I'm going to run a complete infectious disease panel. Test for everything from common bacterial infections to rarer conditions like tularemia and leptospirosis. Given the fever pattern and the lack of response to standard antibiotics, we're looking at something atypical." "How long will the test take?" Marco asked from his position by the window. "The basic panels, a few hours. Some of the specialized tests will take 24 to 48 hours. But I can start targeted treatment, based on preliminary results." Dr. Russo looked at Elena. "Your son is very sick, but he's not in immediate danger. We caught this in time. Once we identify the pathogen, we'll know exactly how to treat it." The relief hit so hard Elena had to sit down. Thank you. God, thank you. Thank Mr. Castellano. He's the one who called me at home during dinner. Dr. Russo began issuing orders to the nursing staff who'd gathered in response to the earlier commotion. His authority transformed the room from chaotic to organized within minutes. Elena sat beside Luca's bed, holding his hot little hand, watching as nurses drew blood and started new IV lines with medications she couldn't pronounce. Marco remained by the window, making quiet phone calls that she tried not to overhear. Arranging payment, probably, or dealing with whatever other business required his attention despite the late hour. Time lost meaning. Minutes stretched into hours. Dr. Russo came and went, checking results as they filtered in from the lab. Around 2 a.m, he returned with news. Leptospirosis, he announced. Bacterial infection typically transmitted through water, contaminated with infected animal urine. Given his exposure to that park, it tracks. He probably stepped in contaminated water, or touched something with the bacteria, then touched his mouth or eyes. Is it treatable? Elena's voice was hoarse from 3 days of crying and stress. Very treatable, now that we know what we're dealing with. I'm starting him on intravenous penicillin immediately. We should see improvement within 12 to 24 hours. He'll need to stay hospitalized for at least a week for monitoring, but the prognosis is excellent. Elena pressed both hands to her face, trying to hold back sobs of relief. Luca would be okay. Her baby would survive. There's one more thing, doctor, Russo said gently. If we'd waited even another day to start treatment, he could have developed complications. Kidney failure, meningitis, respiratory distress. You made the right call demanding immediate care. I didn't demand anything. Mr. Castellano did. Dr. Russo glanced at Marco, who'd ended his phone call and was approaching. Then your employer saved your son's life tonight. Marco dismissed this with a slight gesture. Dr. Russo did the actual saving. I just removed obstacles. He looked at Elena. You should stay with your son. I'll have someone bring you clothes and toiletries. Whatever you need, just tell the staff. I can't afford. You're not paying for any of this. Medical bills, hospital stay, medications, follow-up appointments, it's all handled. Consider it a bonus for 14 months of excellent service. Elena stood on shaking legs. Don Castellano, I don't know what to say. This is more than I could have hoped for, more than I deserve. You deserve a child who receives medical care. That's not charity, it's basic human decency. His expression hardened slightly. But I need you to understand something. This stays between us. My associates, my business partners, they don't need to know about this. Victor already thinks I'm being foolish. If word spreads that I'm providing medical care to staff members' children, it creates complications. I understand. I won't say anything to anyone. Good. He moved toward the door, then paused. Maria tells me you're a good cook. When your son is released, when he's healthy again, I want you to make dinner for him. Here, in this room if the hospital allows it, or at your apartment if they don't. Something that makes him happy. Send me the receipts for groceries. That's not charity either. That's an order from your employer. Children should have good food when they're recovering. Then he was gone, taking his security detail and his complicated presence with him. The room felt simultaneously emptier and easier to breathe in. Dr. Russo checked Luca one more time, confirmed the new medications were running properly, then addressed Elena. You should try to sleep. The chair converts to a bed. We'll monitor him through the night, but he should rest easier now that we've got the right antibiotics working. Alone with her sleeping son, Elena finally let herself break down. Silent tears that soaked the collar of her work uniform. Relief and gratitude and exhaustion pouring out in equal measure. Luca's fever was already starting to break. His breathing easier, the tension in his small face relaxing as the medication worked. She'd walked into Don Castellano's dining room prepared to beg, prepared to be fired or humiliated or dismissed. Instead, she'd witnessed something she didn't fully understand. A man whose reputation suggested violence and ruthlessness, who operated in shadows and gray morality, had dropped everything to save a child he'd never met. Because of his sister. Because of guilt that had lived in him for 40 years. Because somewhere under the expensive suits and the controlled power was a 12-year-old boy who'd lost someone he couldn't save. Elena pulled the uncomfortable chair close to Luca's bed, held his hand, and let the exhaustion finally claim her. Tomorrow would bring questions, complications, trying to understand what this meant for her job and her place in the Castellano household. But tonight, Her son was alive and getting better, and that was enough. Morning came with weak October sunlight filtering through hospital blinds, and the steady beep of monitors that had become Elena's heartbeat over the past 12 hours. Luca's fever had broken sometime around 4 in the morning. His forehead felt cool under her palm, his breathing steady and deep instead of the shallow, labored gasps that had terrified her yesterday. Dr. Russo arrived at 7:30, looking remarkably fresh despite having been called away from dinner the night before. He examined Luca with the same methodical care, checking vitals, reviewing lab results on his tablet, asking questions that Luca answered in a voice still hoarse but stronger than yesterday. "Remarkable improvement," Dr. Russo announced. "The penicillin is working exactly as it should. His white blood cell count is already dropping, kidney function is normal, and his fever's been stable at 98.6 for 3 hours. He made notes on his tablet. He'll need to stay here for observation, probably 5 to 7 days total, but he's past the critical stage. Can I have pancakes?" Luca asked, the first time he'd expressed interest in food in 3 days. Elena laughed, the sound catching in her throat. "You can have anything you want, baby." "Mr. Castellano said I should have good food while I'm getting better. He told Mama last night. I was pretending to sleep, but I heard him." Luca's dark eyes, so much like Elena's own, held the kind of wisdom that came from being 6 years old and understanding more than adults realized. "He's nice. Scary, but nice." Dr. Russo's expression suggested he have understood exactly what kind of man Marco Castellano was, but he simply smiled at Luca. "Pancakes sound perfect. I'll have the nutritionist approve it and we'll get you some breakfast." After he left, Elena helped Luca sit up more comfortably, adjusting pillows and checking his IV line with the practiced efficiency she'd developed over 3 days of hospital vigil. "You scared me," she said softly. "I thought I was going to lose you." "I'm too tough to die, Mama, like a Spinosaurus." But his small hand gripped hers tightly, betraying the fear he'd felt too. "Are we in trouble? For costing so much money?" "No, baby, we're not in trouble. Mr. Castellano took care of everything." "Why? We're not his family." Elena thought about how to answer that. How to explain complicated morality to a 6-year-old, the way guilt could motivate kindness, how even dangerous men could have principles that guided their actions. Sometimes people help because it's the right thing to do. Mr. Castellano had a sister who got sick when she was young, and he couldn't help her. So now he helps other kids when he can. That's sad. Luca processed this with the blunt empathy of childhood. "I'm glad he helped me, though. Will I have to work for him when I grow up to pay him back?" "No." Elena's voice was firm. "You're going to grow up and become a paleontologist, just like you want. You're going to dig up dinosaur bones and discover new species and write papers that other scientists read. That's your future, not what Mr. Castellano does." Luca seemed satisfied with this. Breakfast arrived shortly after, actual pancakes with syrup and fruit, far better than standard hospital food. Elena helped him eat, marveling at how much color had returned to his face, how the medication had pulled him back from the edge so quickly. Her phone buzzed with a text from Maria. "The Don wants you to take whatever time you need. Your position is secure. Victor is sulking, but that's his problem, not yours. Focus on your boy." Relief washed through her. She'd been worrying about her job, about whether this would be seen as manipulation or exploitation, whether stepping out of invisibility would cost her the income she desperately needed. But Marco had meant what he said. This was handled, taken care of, removed from the list of catastrophes she was juggling. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The next 5 days established a rhythm that felt surreal in its stability. Elena stayed at the hospital, sleeping in the uncomfortable chairbed, eating meals from the cafeteria that appeared on her tray with notes that read, "Courtesy of Mr. Castellano." Luca's improvement was steady and remarkable. By day 3, he was sitting up, coloring pictures of dinosaurs, demanding books from the hospital library. By day 5, he was walking the halls with his IV pole, charming nurses and other patients with his enthusiasm for prehistoric reptiles. Dr. Russo visited twice daily, his reports consistently positive. Another few days and he'll be ready for discharge. You'll need to continue oral antibiotics at home for 2 weeks, and we'll schedule follow-up appointments to ensure complete recovery. But honestly, Elena, he's doing better than I expected. Children are remarkably resilient. Marco didn't visit again, but his presence was felt in other ways. The private room that insurance would never have covered, The meals that appeared 3 times daily, far better than hospital food. The way hospital staff treated them with deference that suggested someone powerful had made their well-being a priority. On day 6, Victor Rossi appeared at the door. Elena had been reading to Luca from a book about triceratops, her voice doing different characters, making her son giggle despite his exhaustion. She looked up to find the consigliere standing in the doorway. His expression, unreadable. "Mr. Rossi," she said, standing quickly. Luca watched from his bed with curious eyes, sensing the change in atmosphere. "The Don sent me to check on progress," Victor said stiffly. His discomfort was evident in every line of his body. This was not a man who made social calls or concerned himself with staff welfare. Dr. Russo's reports have been positive, but Mr. Castellano wanted a personal assessment. "Luca's doing much better. The doctors say he can probably go home in 2 or 3 days. Victor nodded, his attention shifting to Luca. His expression softened almost imperceptibly. "You're the dinosaur expert, I'm told." "Yes, sir." Luca sat up straighter, always ready to discuss his passion. "Did you know that dinosaurs lived for over 165 million years? Humans have only been around for about 300,000 years. We're really new compared to them." "I did not know that. That's quite impressive." Victor pulled an envelope from his jacket, pocket, and handed it to Elena. "Your pay for the past 2 weeks, plus a bonus for the inconvenience. The Don also wanted me to convey that your position remains secure. When you're ready to return to work, we'll accommodate your schedule around your son's recovery needs." Elena opened the envelope to find twice her normal pay, plus an additional $5,000 marked as medical leave bonus. Her hands trembled. "This is too much. I can't accept. You can and you will. The Don's orders are not negotiable." Victor's tone brooked no argument. "He also wanted me to remind you of his expectations regarding discretion. This arrangement, his intervention, the medical expenses, they remain private matters." "I understand. I haven't told anyone. I won't." "Good." Victor turned to leave, then paused. "Elena, I was opposed to the Don's involvement in your situation. I advised against it. I thought it set a dangerous precedent, showed weakness, invited exploitation." He looked back at her. "I was wrong. What he did was correct, even if it complicates things organizationally. That child deserves to live, and you deserve help when you need it. That's not weakness. That's—" He trailed off, seeming to search for words. "That's being better than we have to be." After he left, Elena sat holding the envelope, trying to process what had just happened. Victor Rossi, Marco Castellano's right hand, a man whose reputation suggested ruthless efficiency and cold calculation, had just admitted being wrong, had just acknowledged that some things mattered more than organizational precedent, or appearing weak. "Mama," Luca said quietly. "Are you crying?" "Happy tears, baby. These are happy tears." That evening, as Luca slept peacefully, Elena finally allowed herself to think about what came next. She'd return to work eventually, resume her role as invisible staff in the Castellano mansion. But something fundamental had shifted. Marco Castellano had seen her, really seen her, in a moment of desperate vulnerability, and instead of exploiting it or dismissing it, he'd responded with immediate action that had saved her son's life. She owed him everything, not in the transactional sense that Victor had worried about, not in a way that created obligation or debt, but in the way that changes you, reshapes how you see the world and the people in it. He'd shown her that even in the darkest corners of human activity, kindness could exist, that men who made their living through violence and control could still choose mercy when it mattered most. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Dr. Russo says Luca is ready for discharge on Thursday. I'm having the apartment cleaned and restocked with groceries. Take Friday off as well. Return to work Monday if you're ready." Elena saved the number, typed a response. "Thank you, for everything. There are no words adequate to express my gratitude." The reply came within seconds. "Watching him recover is thanks enough. Make to him that dinner I ordered. Children heal faster with good food and family." She smiled despite the tears threatening again. Marco Castellano, Mafia boss, dangerous man, had just reminded her to feed her son homemade meals during recovery. The juxtaposition was absurd and somehow perfect. Thursday morning arrived with the promise of freedom. Dr. Russo signed discharge papers, reviewed medication schedules, and gave Elena a folder full of follow-up appointment information and warning signs to watch for. "He's made a remarkable recovery," the doctor said, "but he'll need rest for at least 2 weeks. No school, no strenuous activity." just gentle healing and letting the antibiotics finish their work. Luca was thrilled to be leaving, chattering excitedly about seeing his room again, his toys, his books. The hospital staff had become familiar friends over the past week, but nothing compared to home. Marco's driver, Carlo, arrived at 10 in the morning with a car seat already installed, and bags of medical supplies Elena hadn't known Luca would need. He loaded everything efficiently, helped Elena and Luca into the car with professional courtesy, and drove them home through Chicago streets that felt different somehow. Brighter, safer, full of possibility instead of threat. Their apartment building looked shabbier than Elena remembered. Peeling paint, cracked concrete steps, the smell of old cooking oil and mildew that permeated the hallways. But when she unlocked their door, she found transformation. The apartment had been cleaned thoroughly. Windows sparkled, floors gleamed, every surface shone. The refrigerator was full of fresh groceries, including ingredients for Luca's favorite meals. New pillows sat on his bed, softer than the flat ones they'd been using. Medical supplies were organized on the kitchen counter with printed instructions for medication schedules. And on the small dining table, a note in elegant script. Welcome home. Rest. Recover. And remember that some doors remain open when you need them. Mama. Look. Luca had found a package on his bed. Inside was a book, hardcover and expensive, titled The Complete Guide to Dinosaurs of North America. A bookmark held a page showing Spinosaurus in full-color illustration. Tucked into the pages was another note. For the paleontologist in training, study hard. Elena pressed her hand to her mouth, fighting the emotions threatening to overwhelm her. This was more than generosity. This was someone understanding exactly what a 6-year-old boy would need to feel normal again after trauma. A book to escape into, knowledge to pursue, dreams to keep alive despite everything. That evening, she cooked Luca his favorite meal. Chicken parmesan with pasta, garlic bread, and a salad he'd actually eat because she cut the vegetables into dinosaur shapes. They ate at their small table, just the two of them, and for the first time in a week, everything felt right. Can I write Mr. Castellano a thank you letter? Luca asked, sauce decorating his chin. My teacher says we should always thank people who help us. I think that would be very nice. After dinner, while Luca took his medications and got ready for bed, Elena helped him compose a letter. His handwriting was still developing, letters large and uneven, but the words were sincere. Dear Mr. Castellano, thank you for helping me when I was sick. The doctors were very good and the medicine worked fast. I'm much better now. Thank you also for the dinosaur book. It's the best book I've ever had. When I grow up and become a paleontologist, I'm going to discover a new dinosaur and name it after you. Maybe Castellanosaur or Marcosaurus. That would be cool. Your friend, Luca. Elena took a photo of the letter and texted it to Marco's number, adding, he wanted you to have this. We both owe you more than we can express. The response came an hour later, after Luca had fallen asleep in his own bed, hugging the dinosaur book. Marcosaurus has a good ring to it. Tell him I expect an invitation to the museum when he makes his discovery. Take care of each other. Friday and the weekend passed in quiet recovery. Luca's energy returned gradually, his appetite improving, color flooding back into cheeks that had been pale for too long. Elena caught up on sleep, did laundry, tried to process everything that had happened over the past 2 weeks. Monday morning came with surprising nervousness. She'd been away for 12 days, the longest absence since she'd started working for the Castellano family. Would things be different? Would the other staff treat her differently knowing she'd received special consideration? Would Marco expect something in return for his intervention? Some payment beyond gratitude? Maria met her at the service entrance with a fierce hug. Thank God. Luca's okay? Completely recovered. Still taking antibiotics, but doing wonderfully. Good. That's good. Maria pulled back, studied Elena's face. You look better. Less like you're carrying the world. I feel better. Like I can breathe again. The day's work was familiar, comforting in its routine. Cleaning, cooking, preparing for the evening meal that Marco took in the formal dining room. But when she entered to set the table, she found him already there, reviewing documents with Victor. Elena. Marco looked up, his dark eyes assessing. Welcome back. How is Luca? Much better, sir. Thank you again for everything. I received his letter. Marcosaurus, I'm honored. A slight smile touched his mouth, transforming his face from intimidating to almost warm. Tell him I'll expect that museum invitation in about 15 years. I will, sir. Victor cleared his throat. The Dimitri situation requires attention tonight. We have the meeting at 8. Marco nodded, his attention returning to business. Elena took it as her cue to leave, to return to invisibility, to resume her role as staff rather than person. But as she moved through the kitchen, preparing the evening meal, she felt different. Not invisible anymore, not quite. Seen, acknowledged, valued in a way she hadn't been before. It was dangerous, this feeling of mattering to someone powerful. Dangerous because it made her care what he thought, made her want to prove worthy of his intervention. The evening meal service went smoothly. Elena served, cleared, existed in the professional background she'd perfected. But when Marco finished and stood to leave, he paused beside her. If you ever need anything again, he said quietly, voice low enough that only she could hear, you come directly to me. Not Victor, not Maria, me. Understand? Yes, sir. Your son's well-being is not negotiable. Neither is yours. You work for me, which means you're under my protection. That includes medical emergencies, financial difficulties, or anything else that threatens your ability to care for your child. Elena met his eyes, seeing the absolute certainty there. This wasn't manipulation or grooming or setting up future exploitation. This was a man who'd made a decision about what kind of person he wanted to be, what lines he'd draw in a life full of moral complexity. I understand. Thank you. He nodded once and left, Victor trailing behind with papers and phones and the weight of whatever the Dimitri situation entailed. Maria appeared from the kitchen. He's different with you, she observed. Gentler. More like who he was before his father died and all the weight landed on him. I'm just staff, Maria. Nobody is ever just anything to Marco Castellano. You matter to him now. That's both protection and burden. Be careful with it. Over the following weeks, life settled into a new normal. Luca returned to school with a note explaining his absence and restrictions on physical activity. His teacher sent home encouraging messages about his progress, his enthusiasm for learning, his kindness to other students. The antibiotics finished their course, and Dr. Russo pronounced him completely recovered during a follow-up appointment that Marco's office had scheduled and paid for without Elena asking. At work, she resumed her duties with the same efficiency she'd always shown. But there were differences, subtle but unmistakable. Victor treated her with more respect, asked about Luca's well-being with what seemed like genuine interest. The security staff nodded when she arrived instead of simply checking her ID and waving her through. Maria confided more, shared family stories, treated Elena like friend rather than just colleague. And Marco, he watched her with the same intensity he'd shown that first night when her sleeve had ridden up revealing bruises. But now the watching felt protective rather than assessing, like she'd moved from potential threat to something worth safeguarding. It should have made her uncomfortable. Instead, it made her feel safer than she had in years. One evening in late November, 6 weeks after Luca's hospitalization, Marco asked her to stay after dinner service. Victor had already left. The other staff dismissed for the night. Just the two of them in the formal dining room that suddenly felt too large and too intimate at the same time. Sit, he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. Not an order exactly, but not a request either. Elena sat, hands folded in her lap, trying to read his expression. I want to offer you a different position, Marco began. Not servant work. Something that uses your intelligence rather than just your ability to be invisible. Sir, you have a degree in business administration from the University of Honduras. I had Victor research your background after Luca's illness. You worked as an accountant before immigrating, correct? Elena's surprise must have shown on her face. Yes, but my credentials don't transfer. I'd need American certification, years of additional schooling, which I'll pay for. Marco leaned forward. I have legitimate businesses that require careful financial management. Import companies, restaurants, real estate holdings, all legal, all requiring skilled oversight. I want you to manage the books for the restaurant division. Start there, learn the operations, eventually move into broader oversight. Why? I'm qualified to clean and cook, not manage businesses. You're qualified to do whatever you have the intelligence and skill to accomplish. The cleaning and cooking are what you settled for because you had a child to feed and bills to pay. His voice was firm but not unkind. I'm offering you the opportunity to be more than circumstances forced you to become. Elena's mind raced. Better position meant better pay. Better pay meant security for Luca, college savings, the ability to give him opportunities she'd only dreamed about. But it also meant deeper involvement with Marco's world, more visibility, potentially more danger. "What's the catch?" she asked bluntly. Marco smiled, the expression transforming his face. "Smart. Question. The catch is that you'll know more about my operations. See financial flows that reveal business relationships I keep private. You'll need to be absolutely trustworthy, completely discreet, and comfortable with moral ambiguity. The legitimate businesses fund the less legitimate ones. Sometimes. Sometimes it's the reverse. Often they're completely separate. But yes, you'll see connections that make the full picture complicated." Elena thought about Luca's letter, about Marcosaurus, about the promise of a future where her son could be anything he wanted without limitation. Thought about Maria's warning that mattering to Marco Castellano was both protection and burden. "I'll need to arrange childcare for Luca after school," she said finally. "The hours would be different than cleaning work. Already handled. There's a program at his school, aftercare with homework help and activities. I'll cover the costs. You'll work 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, weekends off, unless there's emergency situations. You've already planned this entire thing. I don't make offers without having solutions to predictable obstacles." He pulled out a folder, slid it across the table. "Employment contract. Better salary, benefits including full medical coverage for you and Luca, retirement contributions, and paid time off." Victor reviewed it, as should you before signing. "Take it to a lawyer if you want independent advice." Elena opened the folder, scanned the first page, and had to read the salary line 3 times to believe it. $60,000 annually, nearly triple what she made as household staff. Medical benefits that would mean never again choosing between Luca's health and their financial stability. 2 weeks paid vacation, sick leave, retirement matching. This is too generous. It's market rate for a financial manager with your education and experience. "I'm not doing you favors, Elena. I'm making a business decision. You're smart, loyal, and capable. I need people like that in positions where they can help me build legitimate enterprises." He paused. "But I won't lie to you. This also makes you more valuable to me personally, which means anyone who wants to hurt me might see you as a target. The protection I provide becomes more necessary, more active. Like what happened to whoever Tyler was in that second story." The reference to the inspiration story slipped out before Elena could stop it. Marco's expression darkened. "I don't know what you're referring to, but if you're asking whether I protect the people under my care from threats, the answer is yes, by whatever means necessary." Elena looked at the contract, at the promise of security and opportunity it represented, looked at Marco, dangerous and complicated, and somehow trustworthy in his brutal honesty. Thought about Luca and his dinosaur dreams, and the future she could give him with this salary. "I'll need to give 2 weeks' notice from my current position. Consider this your notice. You start the new role December 1st. That gives you 2 weeks to transition, for me to hire your replacement in household staff, and for you to review the restaurant financials before taking over." He stood, offered his hand. Elena took it, his grip firm and careful at the same time, and felt her life pivot in a direction she'd never anticipated. "Welcome to the business side of things," Marco said. "Try not to be too shocked by what you discover in the financial records. I'll do my best." That night, lying in her bed in the small apartment that would maybe someday become something better, Elena thought about choices and consequences. About how saying, "Please don't fire me, my son needs medicine," had somehow transformed into a career opportunity. About how Marco Castellano's dead sister had saved her living son. Guilt and grief creating a chain reaction of kindness that neither of them could have predicted. Her phone buzzed. A text from Marco. "Luca wrote me another letter. He says his science project got an A. Smart kid. You should be proud." Elena smiled in the darkness, typing back, "I am. Thank you for giving him the future to be proud of." The response was immediate. "Thank you for trusting me with it." She fell asleep with the contract on her nightstand and hope in her chest, feeling for the first time in 6 years that maybe life could be more than survival. Maybe it could be building something, becoming someone, choosing trust despite danger. Tomorrow she'd tell Luca about the new job. He'd be excited. Would probably ask a dozen questions about what financial managers do and whether it involved dinosaurs. She'd figure out how to explain that sometimes the most dangerous people could also be the safest, that protection didn't always look like what you expected, that gratitude could transform into opportunity if you were brave enough to accept it. But tonight, she just breathed in the quiet of their small apartment and let herself believe in second chances. December 1st arrived with the kind of cold that made Chicago feel like it was carved from ice. Elena stood outside the restaurant that would become her primary responsibility, watching her breath create clouds in the morning air. Bella Vita occupied a corner lot in a neighborhood that straddled the line between legitimate wealth and something darker. The building was beautiful, all exposed brick and large windows, the kind of place where business lunches happened and deals were sealed over expensive wine. Marco's driver had dropped her off at 8:30, even though her official start time wasn't until 9. She wanted these 30 minutes alone, wanted to see the place without anyone watching her reaction, processing what this transition actually meant. The front door was locked, but she had keys now, 3 of them on a ring that felt heavy with responsibility. She let herself in, disabled the alarm with the code Victor had provided, and stood in the empty dining room that could seat 80 when full. Everything was elegant, without being ostentatious. White tablecloths that would be added before service, dark wood chairs, subtle lighting that would make everyone look attractive. The bar ran along one wall, bottles arranged with artistic precision, glasses hanging from racks that caught the morning light. This was hers now, not literally, but operationally. The financial health of this restaurant and 3 others like it scattered across Chicago would be her responsibility. Making sure suppliers were paid, employees received accurate paychecks, profit margins stayed healthy, and most importantly, ensuring that every transaction could withstand scrutiny from authorities looking for irregularities. "You're early." Marco's voice came from behind her, making her jump. She turned to find him emerging from the kitchen, wearing dark slacks and a charcoal sweater instead of his usual suits. He looked younger somehow, less intimidating, without the armor of formal business attire. "I wanted to see it without the noise of service," Elena admitted. "Try to imagine what working here actually means. And what's your assessment?" She looked around again, this time with the analytical eye of someone responsible for financial operations. "It's beautiful. Well-maintained, good location. The kind of place that should be profitable if managed correctly. But I'm guessing the profit margins are thinner than they should be, which means either waste in operations, theft somewhere in the chain, or intentional maintenance of modest success to avoid attracting attention." Marco smiled, the expression reaching his eyes. "All 3, actually. The previous manager was skimming, which I addressed 6 months ago. The kitchen has waste issues because the head chef orders premium ingredients and then uses only portions, throwing away the rest. And yes, I keep profits modest intentionally. Restaurants that are too successful attract examination from people who ask uncomfortable questions. So my job is to stop the waste, prevent future theft, and maintain the appearance of moderate success, while actually generating enough profit to justify the operation." "Exactly right. See? I knew you'd understand this within minutes." He gestured toward the back office. "Come. I'll show you where you'll be working." The office was small but well-equipped. A desk with a computer and dual monitors, filing cabinets that looked recently organized, and a window that overlooked the alley behind the restaurant. Not glamorous, but functional. "Financial records going back 3 years are in the system," Marco explained, logging into the computer with credentials he'd written on a card for her. "Supplier contracts, employee files, tax documentation, everything you need to understand the operation. Victor will stop by this afternoon to review reporting requirements and answer questions about organizational structure." Elena sat at the desk, the chair adjusting smoothly to her height. The dual monitors displayed spreadsheets that made her accountant brain activate after years of dormancy. Numbers, patterns, the story that financial records told if you knew how to read them. "I have a question," she said, scanning the October revenue report, "and I need you to be honest with me." "I'm always honest with you, Elena. Will I find evidence of illegal activity in these records? Money laundering, payment to criminal enterprises, anything that would make me complicit in crimes if authorities ever investigated?" Marco pulled up a chair, sat across from her so they were at eye level. "The restaurants are completely legitimate. Every dollar that flows through these operations is legal, taxed, documented. I don't use them for laundering because that would endanger something I'm building toward. These businesses are meant to be clean, sustainable, the foundation for eventual complete legitimacy. But other parts of your organization aren't clean. No. Other parts operate in gray areas or outright illegal territory. But those operations are kept completely separate. Different accounting, different personnel, different financial institutions. You will never see that money or those activities in your work here." He leaned forward. "I'm compartmentalizing intentionally, Elena. building walls between the legitimate businesses and everything else. When I eventually walk away from the criminal operations, these restaurants, the import companies, the real estate holdings, they'll continue functioning without any taint. How long until you can walk away completely? 5 years, maybe 10. Some obligations take time to unwind. Some relationships require careful management to exit without creating power vacuums that lead to war. His expression was serious. But I'm working toward it. Every decision I make now is in service of that goal. Elena nodded slowly, understanding the complexity he was navigating. Okay, I can work with that. As long as what I'm touching stays clean. It will. You have my word. He stood, moved toward the door, then paused. Luca's after-school program starts today, correct? Yes. He was excited this morning, kept talking about the science activities they do on Mondays. Good. He should have opportunities to explore his interests. Marco's voice softened slightly. My sister never got that chance. Everything was controlled by my father's paranoia and violence. I want better for the children around me now, even if I can't change what happened to her. After he left, Elena spent 2 hours just reading through financial records, getting a feel for the restaurant's rhythms and patterns. Revenue fluctuated predictably by season and day of week. Expenses showed the waste Marco had mentioned, ingredient orders far exceeding what menu volume would require. Payroll was clean, everyone documented properly, taxes withheld correctly. But then she found something odd. A recurring payment to a vendor called Northside Consulting Services. $5,000 monthly, paid like clockwork for the past 18 months. No contract in the files, no description of services rendered, just regular payments that vanished into a business entity she couldn't find information about. She made a note to ask Victor about it when he arrived. The lunch service started at 11:30. Elena could hear the kitchen coming alive, the front of house staff arriving, the general manager greeting them with instructions for the day. She stayed in her office, diving deeper into records, finding other anomalies that needed explanation. Victor appeared at 2 in the afternoon, precisely when he'd said he would. He looked around the office with approval, taking in the organized stacks of documents Elena had pulled, the notes she'd made on a legal pad. You work fast, he observed. I'm trying to understand 3 years of operations in a few hours. It's a lot to absorb. She pulled up the spreadsheet showing the Northside Consulting payments. What's this? Victor's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. Protection payment to a local crew that controls this neighborhood. We pay them to ensure the restaurant operates without interference, that delivery trucks aren't hijacked, that customers don't get harassed in the parking lot. So it's extortion. It's the cost of doing business in certain neighborhoods. The alternative is constant problems that would cost far more than $5,000 monthly. Elena made another note. Is this reported to authorities? Because if it's protection money, it's illegal to pay it, and it's definitely illegal to deduct it as a business expense. Victor's jaw tightened. We report it as consulting services, which, from a certain perspective it is. They consult on how to avoid problems. That's fraud. If the IRS ever audits this location, they'll see right through it. Elena pulled up the tax returns, scanned the deductions. And you're claiming it, which means you're inviting exactly the scrutiny Marco wants to avoid. Then what do you suggest? Victor's tone carried challenge. We can't not pay it. The crew would make our lives impossible. And we can't report it accurately because that admits to illegal activity. Elena thought for a moment, her accountant brain working through the problem. We stop claiming it as a deduction. Take it out of after-tax profit as a distribution or owner expense. It still gets paid. The crew stays happy. But it doesn't appear in the restaurant's operating expenses where auditors would question it. Victor stared at her. That costs Marco more in taxes, by maybe $1,500 annually per location. Far less than what it would cost if the IRS decided these consulting payments look suspicious and launched a full audit that exposes everything. A slow smile spread across Victor's face. You've been here 6 hours and you've already found the problem I've been creating for 3 years. Maybe Marco was right about you. They spent the next 2 hours reviewing proper financial practices, discussing which expenses could be legitimately claimed and which needed different handling. Victor was meticulous, asking pointed questions that tested Elena's understanding. By the time he left at 4:30, she felt exhausted but energized. This was real work, complex problem-solving that used her education and intelligence. So different from cleaning and cooking, which had required physical effort but little mental engagement. Her phone buzzed with a text from the after-school program. Luca had a great first day. He taught the other kids about velociraptors during science time. Pick up by 6 p.m., please. Elena smiled, gathered her things, and locked up the office. She'd return tomorrow to continue unraveling the restaurant's financial story. But tonight, she needed to be mom, to hear about Luca's day, to make dinner and help with homework, and maintain the normal life that Marco's intervention had made possible. The weeks that followed established new patterns. Elena worked 9 to 5, managing financial records with increasing confidence. She discovered more irregularities, addressed them with Victor's sometimes reluctant approval, and slowly transformed the restaurant's books from functional mess to organized clarity. The head chef, a temperamental artist named Giovanni, who'd worked for Marco's family for 15 years, initially resented her questions about ingredient waste, but when she showed him data proving he was throwing away 30% of premium purchases and worked with him to adjust ordering to match actual menu usage, his attitude shifted. "You're saving me money, I can invest in better equipment," he admitted during a meeting in mid-December. "Maybe you're not so bad for accountant." The general manager, Lisa Chen, was easier to work with. She'd been running front-of-house operations for 3 years and welcomed Elena's financial insights. Together they analyzed table turnover rates, adjusted reservation systems, and identified opportunities to increase revenue without compromising service quality. "Marco hired right when he brought you on," Lisa said over coffee one afternoon. The previous financial manager was basically a ghost. Showed up once a week, reviewed numbers, never engaged with actual operations. "You're actually helping us improve." At home, Luca thrived in his after-school program. He'd made friends with 2 other kids obsessed with dinosaurs, and they formed what Elena privately called the Paleontology Club. His teacher sent regular updates praising his enthusiasm and kindness to other students. The medical bills that had terrorized Elena for months were completely resolved, paid in full by Marco's office. Dr. Russo's follow-up appointments confirmed Luca's complete recovery. The leptospirosis had left no lasting damage. Her son was healthy, happy, and dreaming of dinosaurs again. But Elena noticed changes in herself too. She walked differently now, with confidence instead of the apologetic posture of someone trying not to take up space. She spoke up in meetings, offered opinions, pushed back when decisions didn't make financial sense. The invisibility she'd perfected as household staff had been replaced by visibility that felt both empowering and exposing. Marco noticed. He stopped by the restaurant most weeks, ostensibly to check on operations, but really, Elena suspected, to see how she was managing the transition. They'd have conversations in her office, reviewing financial reports, discussing operational challenges, and occasionally touching on topics that had nothing to do with business. Luca's science teacher called me, Elena mentioned during one of these visits in early January. She wants to recommend him for the gifted program. Advanced classes, special projects, opportunities most kids don't get. That's excellent. Marco's face showed genuine pleasure. "You must be proud." "I am, but it comes with costs. Field trips to museums, special materials, a summer program that's $3,000. The teacher said they have scholarships, but..." Elena trailed off, uncomfortable with what she was about to ask. "But you don't want to take charity when you're earning good money now." Marco finished her thought. "I understand. However, the summer program scholarship, I fund that. Have for 10 years, anonymously through a foundation. So technically, Luca would be receiving my help either way." Elena stared at him. "You fund gifted education programs?" "My sister was exceptionally bright, taught herself to read at 4, was doing advanced mathematics at 7, but my father saw her intelligence as threat rather than gift. Refused to let her attend special programs, said education beyond basics was wasted on girls." The old pain flickered across his face. "After she died, I established a foundation in her name. It funds educational opportunities for bright children whose families can't afford them. Luca fits that profile perfectly, even with your improved salary." "The foundation, is it connected to you publicly?" "No. It's managed through trustees, kept separate from anything that could be traced back to my criminal activities. The money is completely clean, coming from legitimate investments and business profits." He met her eyes. Julia deserved better than she got. "I can't change her past, but I can help other children have the futures she was denied." Elena felt her throat tighten. "You're more complicated than you appear. Most people are. We just don't all have the resources to act on our complications." In February, Elena discovered something that changed her understanding of Marco's operations entirely. She was reviewing consolidated financial reports across all 4 restaurants, looking for patterns and opportunities for system-wide improvements, when she noticed something odd. The restaurants were profitable, but barely. After all expenses, they generated maybe 5% annual return on investment. For legitimate businesses in expensive Chicago locations, that was reasonable, but not impressive. Certainly not enough to justify the attention Marco gave them. Unless profit wasn't the point. She pulled employment records across all locations, found that Marco employed 47 people directly through the restaurants, 47 individuals receiving legal paychecks, with taxes withheld, building Social Security credits, qualifying for unemployment insurance if laid off. Then she cross-referenced against public records, looking at employee backgrounds, found that 32 of the 47 had criminal records, convictions ranging from minor drug charges to assault to weapons violations, the kinds of records that made employment nearly impossible in normal circumstances. Marco was using the restaurants as rehabilitation programs, giving people with criminal pasts legitimate employment, second chances, pathways back to legal society. The modest profits weren't bugs in the system, they were intentional. He was prioritizing employment over maximizing returns. She was reviewing this data when Marco entered her office unannounced. He saw what was on her screen, saw the realization on her face. "You figured it out," he said, closing the door behind him. "The restaurants aren't primarily businesses. They're social programs disguised as businesses. They're both." He sat across from her, his expression guarded. "Yes, I employ people with records because they can't find work elsewhere. But they're good employees, Elena. Loyal, hardworking, grateful for the opportunity. Giovanni has a manslaughter conviction from 30 years ago. Lisa Chen did 3 years for embezzlement before I hired her. Even Carlo, my driver, he served 8 years for armed robbery. And you trust them? More than I trust people with clean records who've never faced consequences. Someone who's lost everything and gotten a second chance. They understand value in ways others don't." Marco leaned forward. "My father employed people through fear. They stayed because leaving meant death. I want to build something different. Employ people through opportunity. They stay because leaving means losing something precious, a legitimate life they couldn't have otherwise." Elena thought about her own situation, about how Marco's intervention had transformed her from desperate staff to professional with prospects, how he'd given her opportunity wrapped in crisis response. "I'm part of this too," she said quietly. "Immigrant with credentials that don't transfer, single mother. You gave me a chance when my circumstances were desperate. You're part of it because you're qualified and capable. The desperation just meant you were willing to accept the opportunity despite its complications." He stood, moved to her window overlooking the alley. "I'm trying to build an organization that can transition from criminal to legitimate without abandoning the people who've been loyal. That means creating real jobs, real opportunities, real pathways to legal life. The restaurants are testing grounds for whether that's actually possible." "Is it possible, I mean? I don't know yet, but I have to try. The alternative is staying in criminal operations forever, or walking away and leaving everyone who depended on me scrambling." He turned back to her. "That's not the legacy I want. Not what I want to pass on if I ever have children of my own." The mention of children surprised her. She'd never heard Marco reference personal future beyond business operations. "You think about having a family someday?" "Sometimes. When I imagine a future beyond all this." His expression was vulnerable in a way she'd never seen. "But what woman would choose this life? Choose me, knowing what I am and what I've done? It's why I focus on business transformation instead. That's achievable. Personal happiness feels too complicated." Elena wanted to say something, to offer comfort or perspective. But before she could find words, her phone rang. "Luca's school," the caller ID said. Her heart immediately jumped to worst-case scenarios. "Hello? Miss Vega, this is Principal Morrison. Luca is fine, but there's been an incident. Another student pushed him during recess and he hit his head. The nurse checked him and doesn't think it's serious, but given his medical history, we thought you should know immediately. I'm coming now." Elena was already grabbing her coat. "Tell him I'll be there in 15 minutes. "Take my car," Marco said, keys already in his hand. "Carlo will drive you. It's faster than trying to catch a bus." She didn't argue. 20 minutes later, she was at the school, being led to the nurse's office where Luca sat with an ice pack against his temple. He looked small and shaken but alert. "Mama," he said, relief flooding his face. I'm okay. It wasn't bad. The nurse, a competent woman in her 50s, showed Elena the small bump and explained what she'd observed. No loss of consciousness, no nausea, pupils responding normally. I don't think it's a concussion, but given his recent illness, I'd recommend having his regular doctor take a look just to be safe. Elena called Dr. Russo's office from the nurse's station. His receptionist, who'd come to know Elena's name, said they could fit Luca in at 4 if she could get him there. Marco's driver was still waiting when they emerged from the school. Mr. Castellano said to take you wherever you need, Carlo explained. Doctor appointment, home, back to work, whatever you require. At Dr. Russo's office, the examination was thorough but quick. Minor bump, no signs of concussion. He's fine, Elena. Keep the ice on it tonight. Give him children's Tylenol if it hurts, and he can go back to school tomorrow. The other kid pushed me because I told him dinosaurs didn't live with cavemen, Luca explained seriously. He said his dad told him they did. I said that's wrong. They missed each other by 65 million years. And then he got mad and pushed me. Dr. Russo smiled. Standing up for scientific accuracy. I respect that. But maybe next time, pick your battles more carefully? I'll try. But I can't let people believe wrong things about dinosaurs, Dr. Russo. That's how misinformation spreads. On the drive back to Elena's apartment, Luca was quiet for a while, then asked, Is Mr. Castellano your boyfriend now? Elena nearly choked. What? No, he's my employer. Why would you ask that? Because he helps us a lot. And he asks about me when you talk to him. Maria says he never did that before, never cared about employees' families. But he cares about us. Luca's 6-year-old logic was painfully direct. That's what boyfriends do, right? Care about you and help you? It's more complicated than that, baby. Mr. Castellano is a good man who helps people when he can. But he's my boss, not my boyfriend. There's a difference. Okay. But Luca sounded unconvinced. That evening, after Luca was asleep, Elena found herself thinking about the question her son had asked, about how Marco had inserted himself into their lives, how his concern had evolved from emergency intervention to ongoing interest, how she'd caught him looking at her sometimes with an expression she couldn't quite read. She wasn't naive enough to misread basic kindness as romantic interest. Marco Castellano could have anyone he wanted. Why would he be interested in a single mother with complications? An employee who'd crossed from staff to management but still came from poverty. But then she remembered his words from that afternoon. What woman would choose this life? Choose me, knowing what I am and what I've done? Maybe he wasn't as unreachable as she'd assumed. Maybe his isolation was as much about fear of rejection as it was about protecting others from his dangerous world. Her phone buzzed. A text from Marco. Carlo said Luca is fine. Good news. Take tomorrow off if you need to stay home with him. She typed back. He's cleared for school tomorrow. I'll be at work normal time. But thank you for letting me use your car and driver. It made a scary situation much easier. His response came quickly. That's what resources are for. Using them to help people who matter. Elena stared at that last phrase. People who matter. She mattered to him, not just as employee, but as person. The realization was both warming and terrifying. She fell asleep, thinking about complicated men and second chances, about how sometimes the most dangerous people could also be the safest, and about whether she was brave enough to acknowledge feelings that were probably mutual but definitely impossible. March brought Chicago's false spring. Those few weeks where temperatures climbed to almost pleasant before winter reminded everyone it wasn't actually done yet. Elena had been managing the restaurant finances for 3 months now, and the improvements were measurable. Waste down 30%, profit margins up 8%, while maintaining employment levels, and most importantly, every transaction clean enough to withstand audit scrutiny. Victor had grudgingly admitted she was exceeding expectations. Lisa Chen was lobbying for Elena to take over financial management of all Marco's legitimate operations, not just the restaurants. Even Giovanni had stopped complaining about her ingredient oversight, especially after she'd used the savings to fund the kitchen equipment upgrade he'd wanted for years. But the professional success came with personal complications. Elena found herself thinking about Marco more than was appropriate for an employer-employee relationship. The way his expression softened when she mentioned Luca's accomplishments. How he'd started finding excuses to visit the restaurant more frequently. The careful way he maintained physical distance. Never. Touching her casually like he might with other employees, as if afraid contact would reveal something better left hidden. She was filing March financial reports when Lisa knocked on her office door. Elena, there's someone here to see you. He's insisting it's personal and urgent. Elena looked up, concerned. Did he give a name? Javier Vega. Says he's your ex-husband? Elena's blood went cold. Javier, Luca's father, who'd abandoned them before their son was born, who she hadn't heard from in over 6 years. What could he possibly want now? She found him in the restaurant's front waiting area. He looked older than she remembered, harder, with the kind of face that suggested life hadn't been kind. He was wearing cheap clothes and had the desperate edge of someone with nothing left to lose. Elena, he said, his accent thicker than hers, less worn smooth by years in America. You look good, successful. What do you want, Javier? Can't I just visit my ex-wife? See how she's doing? See my son? Your son? You've never met Luca. You left before he was born and never sent a single dollar of support. Elena kept her voice low, aware of staff nearby. You have no rights to see him, and I have no interest in talking to you. Whatever you want, the answer is no. Javier's expression hardened. I heard you're working for Marco Castellano now, managing his money. That's interesting, Elena. Very interesting. Especially since I know people who'd pay well for information about Castellano's operations. The threat was unmistakable. Elena's hands clenched at her sides. You need to leave. Now. Or what? You'll have me thrown out? He stepped closer, his voice dropping. I know things about you, too. About your immigration status. About how you worked under the table for years before getting legal documentation. One call to immigration authorities and they'd investigate your whole history. My status is completely legal. I have nothing to hide. Maybe not, but the investigation itself would be hell. And in the meantime, I could file for parental rights to Luca, force you into custody battle. Make your life complicated in ways you can't afford right now. Elena felt panic rising but forced it down. What do you want? $50,000. Payment for all the years I stayed away, all the support I never asked for. You give me that, I disappear forever. You never hear from me again. I don't have $50,000, but your boss does, and you have access to his money. Transfer it from one of his accounts. He'll never notice. Rich men like Castellano lose more than that in a single night at poker. You're asking me to steal from my employer. I'm asking you to buy your peace and your son's safety, because if you don't, I make life very difficult for both of you. Maybe I even let slip to the wrong people exactly what kind of financial information you have access to. See how long Castellano keeps you around then. Before Elena could respond, a voice cut through the tension. That's enough. Marco had entered through the kitchen, flanked by Luca and 2 security personnel Elena recognized from the mansion. His expression was absolutely cold, the kind of dangerous calm that made smart people back away. Mr. Castellano, Javier said, attempting bravado. This is a private conversation. Not in my restaurant, it's not. Marco moved between Javier and Elena, a physical barrier. You've just threatened my employee, attempted extortion, and implied you'd interfere with her custody of her son. That's 3 felonies by my count. I'm just trying to get what's owed to me. You're owed nothing. You abandoned your pregnant wife and never provided support. Under Illinois law, you have 0 parental rights. Any attempt to file for custody would be dismissed immediately and likely result in contempt charges. Marco's voice was conversational but carried weight that made Javier step back. As for your threats regarding Elena's immigration status or sharing information about my operations, those are criminal acts that I take very seriously. You going to have me killed? Make me disappear? Javier tried to sound defiant, but fear crept into his voice. Nothing that dramatic. I'm simply going to ensure you understand consequences. Marco pulled out his phone, showed Javier the screen. See this? It's your complete background. Where you're living, where you work, outstanding warrants for unpaid child support in Honduras, current girlfriend who doesn't know about your past. I had my people research you the moment you entered this restaurant and made Elena uncomfortable. Javier's face had gone pale. Here's what happens next, Marco continued. You leave Chicago tonight. You never contact Elena again. You never mention my name or my businesses to anyone. And in exchange, I don't forward this information to appropriate authorities or to your current girlfriend, who I'm sure would be very interested to learn about. Your abandoned child. You can't. I absolutely can. And if you ever come near Elena or Luca again, if you ever threaten them or attempt extortion, the consequences won't be legal ones. They'll be the kind that don't involve police or courts. Do we understand each other? Javier looked at Elena, then back at Marco, reading the absolute certainty in his expression. I understand. Good. My men will escort you to collect your belongings and see you onto a bus out of the city. I'd suggest heading south. Chicago isn't safe for you anymore. After security led Javier away, Marco turned to Elena. Are you all right? How did you know he was here? Lisa called me the moment he arrived. Said something felt wrong about his energy. I had my people run his information while I drove over. He touched her arm gently, the first casual physical contact they'd ever had. Did he hurt you? No, just scared me. The threats about immigration, about custody, I knew they were probably empty, but in the moment, they felt real. I know. His hand remained on her arm, warm and steadying. Elena, I need you to understand something. You're under my protection. That extends to every aspect of your life, not just workplace security. Anyone who threatens you, or Luca, answers to me. Always. You can't fight all my battles, maybe not all of them, but the ones involving extortion and threats against your child, those I can handle. He released her arm, stepped back to professional distance. Take the rest of the day, go home, process this, be with Luca. We can discuss improved security measures tomorrow. Improved security? Marco, what does that mean? It means I'm having someone monitor your apartment building. Make sure no one else from your past decides to show up making threats. It means whenever Luca is traveling to or from school, someone will be watching to ensure he's safe. Nothing intrusive, nothing that disrupts your normal life, just protection that runs in the background. Elena should have objected. Should have said it was too much, too invasive, too personal for an employer-employee relationship. But after the terror of Javier's threats, the promises of violence barely hidden under his words, she couldn't bring herself to refuse. Okay, she said quietly. Thank you. That evening, after explaining to Luca in age-appropriate terms that his biological father had tried to visit but wouldn't be coming back, after reassuring him that they were safe and protected, Elena finally let herself fall apart. She sat on her bathroom floor with the shower running to mask the sound and cried from relief and residual fear and the overwhelming weight of being saved yet again by a man whose protection was both gift and burden. Her phone buzzed. A text from Marco. I know today was difficult. If you need to talk, I'm available anytime. Not as employer, just as someone who cares. She stared at those last 3 words. Someone who cares. This had gone beyond professional courtesy or simple kindness. Whatever was growing between them had weight and complexity that scared her almost as much as Javier's threats had. But maybe being scared wasn't reason enough to run. Maybe sometimes the brave thing was staying, accepting protection, acknowledging feelings that defied logic and appropriate boundaries. She texted back, "Thank you. For everything today. For seeing the threat before I could even process it. For making me feel safe." His response, "You deserve safety. Both of you. That's not negotiable." Elena fell asleep that night with her phone on the pillow beside her, Marco's words the last thing she read, and for the first time since Javier's appearance, she felt the panic receding. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Tomorrow she'd have to address the reality that her feelings for Marco Castellano had evolved far beyond gratitude or professional respect. Tomorrow she'd have to decide if she was brave enough to acknowledge what was becoming increasingly obvious to everyone around them. But tonight, she just breathed and felt protected, and let herself imagine possibilities that seemed impossible but maybe, just maybe, weren't. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel